Chris Mackowski of Emerging Civil War. I'm at the Chancellorsville Battlefield Visitor Center, at the Chancellorsville Battlefield, and the site of the wounding of Stonewall Jackson, who's actually just shot right over there. We're going to take a walk there because that is probably the most asked what if question I get. Historian William C. Davis called it the most asked question in the Civil War world. And for good reason. A lot of people like to think that, gosh, if Jackson had lived, such and such would have happened. And, Robert E. Lee's fortunes changed dramatically after Jackson's death. Chancellorsville is Lee's last offensive battlefield victory of the Civil War. And so, gosh, what if Jackson had survived? Would things have turned out differently? This is the Mountain Road, and it's here on the evening of May 2nd, 1863, that Jackson takes a fateful trip down in that direction. We'll walk down there in just a second. We're turning here, and in this area off to my left, he's accidentally wounded by his own men, who are posted about 70 yards in front of me along the Bullock Road, which runs off to my right toward the Bullock Farm, the site of which is still there today, about a mile away. And so this kind of is the epicenter of the greatest what if of the American Civil War. And I wanted to come out here because we've been exploring what ifs in the Emerging Civil War blog, using them as an opportunity for us to really examine what actually happened and examine our assumptions about the things that we think about when we ask what if, and try to come to some sort of preconceived notions and try to spell out the story we want to have happened. But often, if we really take a look at the situation on the ground, we can see that usually we can't get to where we wish we could go. But what's fascinating to me is that so many people wish for those predetermined outcomes that never actually happened. They want something to have happened differently than the way it did. And to me, that's a fascinating phenomenon. Those of us who have worked here at Chancellorsville over the years, as I have, as many of my ECW colleagues have, we would all tell you, people come and they ask, but what if Jackson had survived? I've actually written on this topic on the blog back in 2014, a pair of blog posts. I'll put the links to those in the comments section. But really, it was that series of posts that triggered our current what if investigations as an organization. Because I've written about them on the blog, I asked our chief historian, Chris White, to write about it for our book, The Great What Ifs of the American Civil War. Longtime viewers know I'm a Stonewall Jackson fanboy, and Chris is a Stonewall Jackson skeptic. And I thought, since I took my swipe at this topic on the blog, I'd have him take a bit different look in the book. So as Jackson came out here on May 2nd, and he rides out here, the turnpike is off to my right, and you can probably hear it in the background. And his division commander, A.P. Hill, takes a reconnaissance trip out in that direction, even as Jackson and his staff are coming down here. This was not rubberized at the time. These are recycled tires. The reason Jackson comes out here is because he has someone who's serving under him by the name of David Kyle, who is a cavalryman whose sister lives up the road. He lives with his sister at the Bullock Farm, so he knows about this road, which doesn't show up on the map. A.P. Hill, who's out on the turnpike, doesn't have a David Kyle, so he doesn't have that insider's knowledge, the home field advantage. So Jackson comes out here about where this wayside sign is, and there's a little a picture there that talks about a fatal reconnaissance. Jackson's not quite as far as his skirmish line, which would be just a couple dozen yards through the woods in that direction, about where the driveway for the Park Service curves in and turns into the parking lot over there. And as Jackson stands here and he listens off in that direction, he can hear the Federals are chopping down trees, they're digging up dirt, they're fortifying their position. And he knows if he's going to wait until the morning to continue this attack, then he's going to hit a fortified position out there. So he decides that he's going to continue this attack at night. And he turns around, and he and his staff ride back in that direction toward the visitor center. They get about 70 yards from the main line, and this ripple of fire comes up from the south. Confederates down on the south end of the line there are spooked. Something gets them firing in the darkness and the weird shadows cast by the moonlight, and that fire ripples up in this direction, hitting Hill and his men out on the turnpike and hitting Jackson and his men here on the mountain road. One of Jackson's staff officers, his brother-in-law, Joseph Morris, is shot from his horse, and he hops up and says, "Stop! You're firing into your own men!" And that actually triggers a concentrated volley from the Confederates, the 18th North Carolina, and Jackson's hit 3 times. He'll be evacuated from the field. He'll have his left arm amputated. I guess if I'm referring to that left arm amputated, and he'll be taken to Guinea Station, where he'll eventually die of complications on May 10th. He'd been sick before the battle. The loss of blood from his injury and from his surgery hide the fact that he's sick. By the time doctors discover it, it's pretty far advanced pneumonia. Lots of armchair doctoring here in the 21st century. Was it sepsis? Was it something else? The doctors at the time diagnosed it as pneumonia, and since I'm not the kind of doctor that actually helps people medically, I'm not going to second guess that diagnosis. I wasn't there. But in any event, Jackson dies. That's down at the what today is called the Stonewall Jackson death site at Guinea Station, which has been preserved as a museum ever since. And so, that question comes up: what if Jackson had survived? And it's an intriguing question, but let's think about what's going on the ground at the moment. Jackson was driving toward the Chancellorsville intersection, which is behind me about a mile. Now I'm facing the Chancellorsville Visitor Center, 180 degrees in that direction. And Jackson decides he's going to push forward, and then, as he tells A.P. Hill when he encounters him back at Dowdall's Tavern, cut them off from the ford, drive them hill, cut them off from the ford. So that suggests he's not going from the camera toward me and Chancellorsville, but instead off in that direction, off toward my right. So once he makes that decision to continue this attack, if he continues in that direction toward cutting off the Federals from the ford, well, he's plunging off into the woods in that direction, in the exact direction where the Union 5th Corps has been waiting unengaged during this day's battle. He's going to have one exhausted division under A.P. Hill plunging in against an entire fresh corps. Remember, Hill's men have been marching all day as part of Jackson's flank march. So it's not like they're fresh and ready and excited to go in. They're dragging in this heat. Temperatures get up into the mid-80s. But not only is the 5th Corps waiting in the woods up there, the Union 1st Corps has come onto the battlefields. Now, I'm a writer. Nobody said there'd be numbers involved, so I don't know how all that math works out, but it suggests to me that Hill's going to have a pretty tough time if he plunges off in that direction. Let's say that he plunges straight forward toward Chancellorsville. When he takes command here after Jackson's wounding, let's say he's like, yes, we'll keep forging ahead. Well, then he's going to be pushing straight into the 2nd Corps, which is already around the Chancellorsville intersection, but then off to my left, south of the turnpike, he's got the Union 3rd Corps and 12th Corps. So again, he'll still have the 5th Corps on his left flank. So the 2nd Corps, the Confederate 2nd Corps here, is going to throw itself into the middle of a huge boondoggle in that direction. So it's not like, if Jackson pushes forward, he's got a lot of good options. Now, the other thing that happens is Hill gets wounded and command devolves to Robert Rhodes, who's not experienced enough to handle the troops. So Jeb Stuart comes onto the field, and he's going to take over, and he's going to reunite with Lee off in that direction, high ground called Hazel Grove. Get a little closer to the road here, so careful, or I apologize. I've got to be careful. I apologize if it gets a little loud here for just a second. So, as a result, probably getting wounded is the best thing to happen here at Chancellorsville for Robert E. Lee's army when Stonewall Jackson gets wounded, because if he continues this attack forward, he's got a lot of Federals he's going to be plunging his exhausted corps into. I've walked out to the road so we can see the 2 markers here. This quartz marker is one of the first markers in the battlefield. It was dredged up from Wilderness Run to sit here next to the road to let passers-by know that, this is the area in which Stonewall Jackson was shot. And then we've got the Jackson marker just across the way over here. And so, again, both of them installed the area in which Jackson was wounded, but not necessarily to mark the specific spot, so that tourists would be able to drive by and recognize that great event took place here. But as soon as people drive by and see this, they're like, oh gosh, Jackson, what if he had survived? And that question continues to come up. Well, we know that if he had not been shot, he's got a whole lot of Federals he's going to be trying to plunge himself into with a small handful of exhausted reinforcements. So things probably don't look so hot for him there. The other thing people forget too, and my colleague Chris White, Emerging Civil War's chief historian, likes to point this out. Let's say that Jackson doesn't get shot. Let's say that he survives, things go well for the Confederates here in the woods. Remember, on the eve of battle, he and A.P. Hill are staring each other down what should become court-martial proceedings. And so you don't think Jackson's just going to let that go, do you? Because I can't think of a single instance where he just let court-martials go. And so he's going to then try to pursue those court-martial charges against Hill, which would create a command crisis here for Robert E. Lee and the Army of the Potomac, Army of Northern Virginia. That was blasphemy, wasn't it? Just confusing the ANV with the AOP. Ooh, sorry. That's going to create some problems. So even in the wake of Chancellorsville, whatever that would look like for the Army of Northern Virginia is going to be problematic for Robert E. Lee, because Jackson and Hill are at each other like a pair of wild dogs. In fact, Hill described himself as a porcupine with his prickles all out. So there's that. There's, of course, the fact that Jackson is sick. He's got pneumonia. And so let's say he survives his wounding. He's still got to get over his illness. So there's that sort of consideration to think about, too. And, of course, the big thing is people like to take Jackson right from here, march him up to Gettysburg, and win that battle. We're going to talk about that in a separate video. But certainly the march out of Chancellorsville is going to be a lot different because Lee takes the opportunity of Jackson's wounding to reorganize his army from 2 corps into 3. So is Jackson still in charge of one of those corps? If he's alive, probably. But then who's in charge of the 3rd Corps? And how does that affect their placement here? How does that affect their movement north? Where do they go? And that's going to all unfold differently too. So people's assumptions about what happens if Jackson lives really unravel pretty quickly. As I said, we'll talk about that in Gettysburg in a separate video. For now, I want you to think about if Jackson had survived, there's a lot going on this ground that makes it almost impossible for us to answer that question, and certainly makes it impossible for us to answer that question in any way that creates a happy ending for the Confederates here at Chancellorsville. So, probing this question of what if really gives us a chance to think things through in a pretty logical and coherent way that gets us away from that wishful thinking. On the Chancellorsville battlefield for Emerging Civil War, I'm Chris Mackowski. We'll see you online and on the battlefield.